Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining me for one of my regular updates from Washington. This is a challenging week. There's been some good news, some to be determined news, and then some things that are just plain pretty crummy that we have to sort through. So let me get at it and talk through the items on the front end, so we got plenty of time for your questions. On the good news standpoint, yesterday, by an overwhelming vote, I think it was north of 80 votes, the Senate sent back to the House our defense authorization bill. This is one of the bills that gets done every year, year in and year out, although even on the NDAA, it gets pushed later and later and later. The good news is that there is a 5.2% pay increase for the men and women who serve in our armed forces. That's good news. There's good news in the bill to try to, again, continue to address a problem that I've been working on for more than a decade, making sure that the quality of life, particularly for our enlisted sailors, Marines, airmen, Army, that their quality of life improves. And that means continued focus on improving housing conditions. It still is I think, an enormous challenge that we're at least 10 years in on my working on this effort, that we don't have full systemic improvement in housing quality improvements. We've got a service member Bill of Rights. We've got the ability for people to withhold their rent payments. But some of these private companies still do a really crappy job on providing adequate housing, and they know their business model is based on the fact that somebody that's going to be only on a 2 or 3 year deployment, they can outweight somebody's complaints, and oftentimes when a spouse is deployed, that makes the burden extra hard. There are some additional improvements in that field. There's, I think, north of 20 construction projects across Virginia that will be implemented by the defense bill, and at $988 billion, I think, is the total top line, the highest defense budget that we've had. And because obviously we live in a very dangerous world. Attached to that defense bill was my bill, the Intel authorization bill, that gives oversight of the literally more than a dozen Intel agencies that my committee has oversight on. A couple of highlights there. We continue to move forward on security clearance reform. It's just crazy that a young person who might want to go work for the CIA or somewhere else in protecting our nation in the past had to wait more than a year to get a security clearance. You're not going to have young people wait that long. We've made great improvements, and this is something that actually even the Trump administration worked on as well with me. We've got that number of backlog down from over 700,000 to around 200,000. We've still got bumps in this process to make sure that if you get cleared with one agency, that clearance will work at another agency, but extraordinarily important. Part of the Intel bill as well was what's called Section 702. This is one of the key tools that our nation uses, basically, to be able to intercept or deal with a foreign individual talking to another foreign individual as a way for us to monitor the bad guys. Literally about 65% of the intelligence that ends up in the presidential daily brief comes from what's called this Section 02 authority. It was due to run out at the end of the year. In the defense bill, there was an extension given till April. We need to have a fulsome debate on this issue. I've got a bipartisan piece of legislation that would extend 702, but put appropriate reforms in place to make sure that those foreign-based communications, if they happen to inadvertently touch an American, that there are protections in place and it's not overused. Bottom line on this is there are a group of, frankly, libertarian members and frankly, folks on both political ends of the extreme who would like to put a subpoena before any Americans' information can be accessed at all. Many times, the vast majority of Americans who this this topic touches, 702, are frankly victims of things like cyber crimes. So we couldn't even notify someone that they've been victim of a cybercrime by a foreign adversary if you had that subpoena power in there. But we will redebate that when the full authorization bill comes up next week. So sorry to go a little deep on that one, but that's a preview of future highlights. The issue that I am most focused on at this moment in time, and that is whether our nation is going to honor its commitment to Ukraine. I know some Americans are saying, well, hey, this has been a war that's close to 2 years long, but let's be clear with the facts. Ukraine, with great loss of life, with our support and NATO countries' support, have literally cut back Russia's military capability by over 50%. In terms of actual Russian army troops deployed, they've cut back by over 80%. They've done that without the loss of a single American soldier or a single NATO soldier. And for us to be thinking about deserting them now would be a stain on our country's honor. It would show that we are not dependable. And the ramifications it would have for any of our alliances, particularly NATO, it would say that America's word's not worth very much, since we repeatedly, and both political parties have said, no, we want to be with Ukraine. Matter of fact, we had President Zelensky came in and talked to the Senate 2 days ago, and every senator who spoke, didn't matter which party, said, we want you to help Ukraine. Well, we've now got to put our money where our mouth is. We are in the midst of what's called the supplemental. The big piece of it is Ukraine aid, but there is also aid for Israel in there in terms of their fight against Hamas. There's humanitarian aid, and you may say, well, why should we take on that responsibility? The challenge is, with the war in the Middle East, and the war in Israel and Gaza, it has basically put a hold on the economy of so many of the surrounding nations. One of our strongest allies historically in the region has been Jordan. Jordan's economy is teetering at this point. They derive a lot from tourism, from a historic site named Petra. Not a lot of tourists going to Jordan with the conflict in the region. And if we don't get this humanitarian aid, both into Gaza and into other surrounding nations, you will literally have thousands of people die from starvation. You will have potentially unrest and overthrowing of governments that have been friendly to the United States. So this package of aid for Israel, humanitarian aid, and then the most important, or the one that is most immediately needed, which is the aid for Ukraine, we're in the final stages of negotiations. I mean, we need to prove that Vladimir Putin was wrong, that his belief is that the West would simply get tired of Ukraine and give up. Well, if Vladimir Putin wins in Ukraine, you will have NATO nations next coming under potential assault from Russia, and you will also be giving a green light to President Xi in China in terms of his expansionist opportunities in Taiwan and elsewhere in Asia. Now, the issue here, and that is being negotiated, is getting the border under control. And I don't think initially they should have been linked, but they are linked. That's the reality. And the crisis at the border is a crisis. There have been some days 12,000 people have passed through the border. That is unsustainable. I think the negotiations now, and it's taken the White House to get very serious on this, will dramatically cut back on those border crossings in a fair and appropriate way to make sure that people aren't simply claiming asylum and then disappearing for multiple years when chances are they would not have been granted asylum in the first place. There will be meaningful changes in border policy being put forward. That will upset some folks on my side of the aisle, but I think it's needed. Frankly, if we get this through, it will have to be bipartisan, and the extremes in both parties will probably be a little bit unhappy. What I'm concerned about as well on this issue is that we don't have time to punt this again. The way we punted our budget, where we don't have our normal budget fight because we simply delayed it till December and January and operating on continuing resolutions, cost taxpayers money. You've heard me on this before. Same time, the idea that we would punt this Ukraine aid, this is the critical moment in time. The Europeans are going through some of their discussions real time today. If we don't step up, I'm afraid the Europeans won't step up, and Ukraine could go into the new year in a greatly weakened position. So we got Ukraine, we've got Israel, we've got the overall challenges, Middle East and the region, we've got the necessity of doing something on border. My hope and prayer, and I've made this appeal to the Democratic leader and the Republican leader, is we need to stay at work and get this done before Christmas in a way that allows us to enjoy the holidays, but also allows our allies to feel secure that America will honor its commitments. Final comment on a slightly lighter note, maybe. I was with the governor and the leadership of Alexandria yesterday when there was the initial announcement of the effort to bring the Washington Wizards and the Washington Capitals to a new home in Alexandria, Virginia. I know the folks at Monumental. I think they are, unlike some other professional sports team owners, these are owners that honor their commitment, that are involved and engaged in the community. As somebody who was a business guy before I was governor or senator, I think the deal structure, which doesn't require the state to put up any money up front, but instead we absorb the tax revenues for this entertainment district. I think it's a good structure, and I think we're only able to do that because of competent long-term fiscal management in Virginia. We've kept that AAA bond rating, something I was proud to protect when I was governor. That means that the debt that's borrowed against these future taxes is borrowed at a lower rate because the Commonwealth would provide the backstop. I believe that that AAA bond rating will not be affected by this deal. The challenge will be twofold, though. We've got to make sure there is a bolder and, frankly, more money put in for some of the transportation infrastructure needs. You've got not only Amazon, you've got the Virginia Tech campus, and now you might have this Monumental Sports facility. We've got to have a broader vision coming from the state on what the transportation improvements would look like. And then secondly, as somebody who's lived in Alexandria for most of my adult life, Alexandria community neighbors are strong, vocal community, Delray community in particular. I think the state and the city probably should have done more outreach in those neighborhood communities because they will have to be assured that their quality of life is not going to be dramatically upset, that there's going to be appropriate parking restrictions so that their neighborhoods are not flooded with fans parking in non-designated areas, and that there's going to be adequate protection so that you don't have any uptick in any kind of crime. I think those goals can be met, but there will be a lot of questions that will need to be answered by both the city and the Commonwealth if this project is to go forward. So why don't we stop there and turn it back over to Laura and let me take some questions.
I do just want to preface for everyone that we have a scheduling constraint, so we're going to quickly answer as many questions as possible, but if we do not reach everyone, we will follow back up and get you an answer to your question. We're going to go to Margaret Barthel with WAMU first.
Yes,
Margaret?
hi, Senator Warner. Yes, hi, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Yes, thank you for taking our questions. I'm curious, since you mentioned the transportation infrastructure needs, there's already been some talk about, some updates to the new Potomac Yard Metro station to make it able to handle the capacity of fans coming to games. I'm curious, particularly given that Metro is having a budget crisis right now. I mean, how do you begin to pay for something like that?
Well, remember, we wouldn't be having any of these transportation improvements if there had not been the bipartisan infrastructure law, which I was proud to be one of the key authors of. We wouldn't even be in the game. And there are challenges at Metro. I've been worried for some time how they went to such a big deficit, even when you take out the downturn from COVID. And the truth is, if there is not a Metro that runs in the evening, and there have been some threats by Metro, they might have to cut back on evening traffic. If we don't have a Metro station that runs until after these games are over, this project's not going to work. So I think the state is going to have to, the other jurisdictions, local, and frankly, I'm trying to get the feds to kick in more on Metro. So that's number one. Number two is Route 1. Route 1's been a challenge. I'm old enough to remember when the then Governor Wilder and Jack Kent Cooke were going to bring then the Redskins to this facility, and people were concerned. And they ended up instead with a strip center there that has a lot more traffic than anything that in a 10 times or 12 times a year stadium would have created back in the 90s. Now, to be clear, this facility with the Caps and the Wizards and a music venue, a concert venue, is going to this is going to be active, 200 plus nights a year. So I think the area that we need to see dramatic improvements on is transportation. Part of it's Metro, part of it is, frankly, a new vision for Route 1, and that's going to take capital.
Senator, we have time for one more question. We're going to go to Robert Hughes with WTVR.
Good morning, Senator. Hope all is well. Going into the mail issue, I know you, Senator Kaine, Congresswoman McEachin, and now Congresswoman Sandberg have reached out about the mail issue. One, have you guys heard anything back from USPS on not only the issues but the town hall? And two, what additional pressure can you place on USPS to be able to handle its own issues with mail service and delivery?
Yeah, listen, this is the problem again that doesn't seem to go away. A lot of our focus was on Charlottesville, where there was enormous delays. I know that has morphed now into some communities around Richmond, where people aren't getting their mail for literally weeks on end. I've also heard some problems in Williamsburg. End of the day, we don't have enough people that work for the Postal Service. End of the day, I mean, like Charlottesville in particular, Chick-fil-A pays a higher starting salary and with a bonus than what the Postal Service does. We tried to get the Postal Service, because there's such low unemployment, for example, in the Charlottesville area, to give an extra bump up on starting salary. And we got turned down. I think that was a short-sighted mistake. The fact is, when I was growing up, the idea of going to work for the post office gave you a stable job with good benefits, and they still are good benefits. But oftentimes young people today are not thinking about the benefits that they might accrue kicking in a year or so later, but they're thinking about how much cash up front. And until we get more competitive on salaries, I think we need better oversight at some of these post offices as well. So we have been in regular contact with the Central Virginia director. We've met with him repeatedly. We do these occasional surges, especially around the holidays, and I think we'll see surges now for the most affected areas. But that's a Band-Aid, because even if you get your gifts and cards around Christmas, and then if everything falls off the cliff in January again, that's not a long-term solution. Now, at a macro level, actually, the Postal Service is slightly doing better. This whole business operation it has got to be remodeled, because the old amount of first-class mail has dropped dramatically, and yet still the post office is stuck with some of the deliveries that the Googles and the FedExes and the Amazons want to have, but the really difficult places to reach still have to be reached by the Postal Service on a non-economic basis. So while the Postmaster General DeJoy, who I used to think was not doing a very good job, my mind has changed. I think he's trying to right the ship. But I frankly believe we need to allow the Postal Service to offer other services beyond postal at their operations, so they can make some more revenue. And that will allow them to hopefully pay a little bit higher salary so we can get more folks into the service. The thing I've heard repeatedly from Virginians is their local mailman or mailwoman, they're happy with. They know these folks are working their tail off, and many of the people at the post office are working their tail off. We just need more folks. And I apologize, everybody. I think I've got something real time on this Ukraine circumstance that I have to get to. If somebody wants, if some of the questions, Laura, didn't get asked, we can try to respond. I know one, let me try to get one in that I thought was going to be asked, and that is, unfortunately in our military, we have seen services not meeting the recruitment goals. I think there's 3 or 4 items. I think one of the items, candidly, is the craziness that took place this year when a single senator held up over 400 military promotions, put through officers' careers into jeopardy. People earned their promotion, didn't get it for clearly political reasons. Most of those holds were removed, but that doesn't help people in terms of recruitment when you have the senior ranks being politicized by a single senator. I think we need to do more on physical fitness. The number of Americans that don't meet the basic, physical fitness criteria for our services, I don't think we should cut back on those criteria, but we do need healthier kids, and that means more PE during high school, I think. We also realize the universe of people who serve in the military as a percentage of our population keep getting stronger or smaller and smaller. And historically, a lot of folks go into the military second and third generation. That universe has gotten smaller. And finally, we need to reaffirm that military is part of our American heritage. And when we have, so many of the extremes on both ends of the political agenda so disparaging of our country, frankly, that I think turns off a lot of young people in terms of providing that service that literally protects all of us. So whatever I can do, I'm meeting with folks on how we could make some other policy changes to get more young people to volunteer, because it is absolutely critical. With that, folks, my apologies, and I think I was going to say this might be our last one before Christmas, but chances are we'll be back for one more, hopefully with great news about Ukraine and Israel and the humanitarian aid. Thank you so much.